Hello and welcome to Spotlight. Today we're going to explore a surprising new chapter in West Asian politics, one that is raising difficult questions and revealing sharp contradictions. Syria, a country battered by more than a decade of war and long isolated by international sanctions. Now, in a twist that has caught many off guard, U.S. President Donald Trump has lifted those sanctions. Why? Well, Trump has been vocal about reviving his Abraham Accords launched during his first term in office. His administration appears determined to push Syria towards normalizing ties with the Israeli regime. And before we go deep into some of today's topics, let me introduce our guest in this edition of the Spotlights. The Executive Committee member, Syria Support Movement, is joining us from Hamilton, Canada. And also, Ali Risk is a security and political analyst, is joining us from Beirut. Gentlemen, welcome to the program and thank you so much for joining us. I don't know who I have right now to start the program with. Ken. So we see Ken. Ken, welcome to the program. Thank you for your time. Let me start with you then. Once a senior commander of Al-Qaeda Syria branch, Joulani was also once a subject of U.S. 10-man bounty, yet today is reportedly having these discussions with Americans and many senior Western politicians. How do we balance this? What is the United States aiming to get by having a once terrorist, once wanted by the United States, now referred to in many Western media as President al-Shara?
Well, the United States waged a regime change war for 14 years approximately in Syria. And they used hybrid warfare to wear down the government and the people of Syria in what amounts to the modern-day equivalent of a medieval siege. They used coercive economic measures. They used the introduction of foreign terrorists. They used lawfare. They used diplomacy. They welcomed the regime change agents into all the Western capitals, gave them lots of money. And so they have achieved their regime change in Syria. Phil Taylor of the Taylor Report calls it Operation Crowbar, and it's been used on many states that the United States has decided to remove from power. They used this long-term crowbar operation on Saddam Hussein in Iraq from about 1991 to 2003. They used it on Syria. They used it on Libya. And now, unfortunately, I think they're trying to use it on Iran as well. Because, of course, you remember that back in 2001, General Wesley Clark went to the Pentagon, reported for duty, and he was told that the U.S. was going to take down 7 countries in 5 years. And Syria, Libya, and Iran were part of those countries. So the U.S., since the end of the Vietnam War, the U.S. has had to get rid of the compulsory draft, and they have been using terrorist mercenaries as their foot soldiers in Afghanistan, in Libya, in Syria, in other parts of North Africa, and Yemen, and so on. And so Mr. Joulani, who was the #2 in ISIS, became the leader of the HTS in Syria. They groomed him, they armed him in Idlib, and they created forces in Turkey last year to invade Syria and to take control of Damascus, which
Yes.
they did. And so now they have, while he had a $10 million bounty on his head, they are in the process of removing that. They've dressed him in a suit and tie. They have him going and meeting foreign officials, Western officials, and it seems that with their lifting of sanctions and the return of the SWIFT system to Syria that they mean to use Mr. Joulani as their main vassal and proxy in Syria.
Yes, stay with me, Ken. I want to go now to Ali Rizk. Ali, welcome to the program. Ali, the issue with Syria is not new, right? We've been following this for almost 15 years with the imposed war on Syria. However, I want to look at the fact that Syria is now incapacitated, especially with its military almost destroyed and non-existent. A large part of its territory is occupied and now annexed, by the Israeli regime. What is the end game here? What is Syria getting from this so-called normalization that is happening in the region? And how is the United States now going to manage the fact that a large percentage of people in this region are very anti-Israel to their governments that are going in line with the normalization accord?
Well, what Syria gets, what Joulani gets is the lifting of sanctions. I think that's clear. Joulani wants to address the country's economic difficulties by lifting the sanctions. The way to lift the American sanctions, the Western sanctions, is to go through Israel to normalize ties with the Israeli side. So I think that the arrangement which is being made is clear, but it is actually undermining Joulani, and it's undermining his leadership. I think many of Joulani's rivals, and there are many, many of them, by the way, including ISIS, who are now, I believe they see themselves as competitors with Joulani. Remember that ISIS recently carried out or was held responsible for an attack which targeted a church in Damascus. Now, this obviously undermines Joulani's leadership, and I think that should he proceed to normalize with Israel, that's going to make him much more of an easy prey for those other competitors, for many of which are also extremist groups.
Right.
So it's not only about the population, I think, it's also about other extremist groups taking advantage of the situation to come to power and to weaken Joulani. And these are all, I think, real possibilities that could become a reality.
So you're saying that you think that the internal factors of Joulani having emerged as a leader within these terrorist groups might come to hunt him if you go ahead with the normalization with Israel?
Might what, sorry?
That the fact that Joulani came into power with these groups of terrorists, now that he might be normalizing with Israel, this might cause internal fracture in Syria. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. Exactly, that's what I'm saying. I think that, by the way, when he met with the US President Donald Trump in Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, that was also subject to fierce criticism from ISIS. And I think that ISIS is waiting for any opportunity to pounce upon, to try and weaken Joulani. And many of them also see in Joulani as someone who has betrayed is so-called, is that what they call, of course, Islamic values, Islamic traditions and doctrine, etc. So this is going to be, the more extremist groups are going to take advantage of what is taking place, I think, to further strengthen their position vis-a-vis Joulani and HTS.
Okay. Ken, let me come back to you, because we are hearing that there is now direct, negotiation or talks between the Israeli regime and the Joulani government, which has been facilitated by the UAE. My first question is, what does UAE get by pushing this narrative that normalization must go on? And secondly, how can Syria, a country that has most of its military, destroyed, a vast percentage of its land and territory occupied, how are you going to negotiate from a weakened place against an Israeli regime that is harmed to the teeth by not just the United States, but also a large percentage of the Western community?
Well, I think that the UAE is acting in this way to help the U.S. force Syria to normalize with Israel, because the UAE is one of those vassal states in West Asia which are solidly in the camp of the imperial power, the USA. Actually, Syria was the strongest country under the Assad family in support of the Palestinian people for about 70 years. There were the Palestinians were allowed to have their resistance groups operate openly in Syria, have headquarters in Damascus. They had militias. They participated with the Syrian government in actions against the state of Israel over the regime change war. But the first thing that happened when Joulani came, well, one of the first things that happened when Joulani came into power was that he demanded that the Palestinian factions, Palestinian organizations, disperse. They disarm. They arrested some of the leaders, and so this was part of the plan by the U.S. and being instituted in this case by and helped by the UAE in order to strengthen the United States' main proxy, its attack dog, its landed, its permanent aircraft carrier, I think Clinton called it that, in the Middle East, namely the genocidal state of Israel. So by removing the Palestinian factor in Palestinian resistance factor in Syria, the U.S. Hopes to make things easier for its proxy Israel. And the name of the game is restoring the United States supremacy, its domination over West Asia, which it lost in 1979 when Imam Khomeini led the Islamic Revolution, which created the Islamic Republic of Iran. The United States would like to go back to pre-1979 days when it had virtually uncontested hegemony over West Asia, and overthrowing Syria is a big part of that program.
Right. Ali, one of the statements that we've been hearing from not just Arab media but also Western media is that the normalization agreement that is ongoing will not only involve Syria but perhaps even Lebanon. And I'd like to get your opinion on that. But I want to focus on the fact that how will the people of the region who have witnessed Palestinians being massacred for over 2 years, for almost 2 years now, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank, and also the attack in Lebanon, and also the aerial attack on Yemen. How will the people of the region, who now have a very strong anti-Israel sentiment, be able to balance that with your government that are going in line with this normalization? Do you think we might be looking at, this normalization program bite itself in the tail? Or do you think that the Americans and whoever is supporting this are smart and they think they can win the people over with some economic incentive?
Before I answer that question, I think that what we must emphasize is that this is another classical example of how American policy in the region remains to a large degree hostage or steered by Israel. Israel, as you know, it had a lot of criticism for Joulani. It was saying that it doesn't trust Joulani, etc. It was bombing. I think that, and there appeared to be a clear divergence between America and Israel vis-a-vis Joulani.
Right.
I think that the Americans were trying to accommodate the Saudis. Remember that it was MBS, Mohammed bin Salman, the Saudi crown prince, who basically requested from Trump to meet with Joulani to ease the sanctions. So Trump, in that case, was answering the request of some of the Persian Gulf allies of the US. The Israelis remain dissatisfied. By having Joulani normalize with Israel, this is one way for the Americans to satisfy Israeli demands. And remember, a lot of the American policy in the region is about satisfying Israeli demands, even, ironically, sometimes when that goes against American interests themselves. So that's the point, I think, which we must emphasize. Regarding your question about Lebanon in particular, I don't think that's in the cards in the near future, even in the long term. That would be unacceptable to a very large segment of Lebanese society, not just, by the way, Hezbollah supporters, but even others.
When you
In
say
some,
others, Ali, who are you referring to when you say others?
I was just going to say, even in some of the predominantly Sunni cities in Lebanon, like the northern city of Tripoli, you see very large protests in condemnation of what Israel is doing to the Palestinians. There's a group called Al Jama'a Al Islamiyya in Lebanon, which even cooperated operationally with Hezbollah during
Right.
the confrontations which took place. So, Lebanon, I think, it's a very, very far fetched scenario. Other countries in the Persian Gulf, for example, like Saudi Arabia, the UAE already has normalized, but Saudi Arabia, I mean, that remains possible. I don't think that's inevitable, by the way, because it's going to lead to a very heavy price.
Hmm.
And I think that the more Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli prime minister, behaves in a way or answers to the demands of the more far-right figures like Ben Gvir and Smotrich,
Right.
the more that would make it difficult for Saudi Arabia to normalize. So I think we know
Well,
that the
Ali, sorry to interrupt you. The Saudis have maintained that they might normalize. They've never said that they won't, but they're only saying that the condition is a two-state solution for Palestine to have a state and to recognize the Israeli entity as well. So there is that possibility, isn't there?
yes, but the Israelis don't appear in any way whatsoever of being in a mood to offer a two-state solution.
Right.
Ben Gvir and Smotrich, they completely dismiss this.
Yeah.
And Netanyahu has to keep these people in his coalition. So if you take those realities in mind, a two-state solution is not on the table. The Israelis aren't offering it, aren't
Okay.
making this possible. That's why I'm saying that it's not inevitable that the Saudis are going to
Right.
normalize.
Stay with me, Ali. I want to go back to Ken. Ken, there's the issue of the occupation of the Golan Heights. And now the rumors that are emerging from reports are suggesting that it's not just the Golan Heights that the Israelis are, demanding to have in any future negotiation for normalization, with Syria, but it's also Kanitrites, some other territories that has been occupied. How do you think now the Syrian population, especially those who are living in that area, will respond to a situation where people will have to leave their land or become Israelis? What is the mentality there? What's happening here?
Well, first of all, it's important to note that the new government of Mr. Joulani, or al-Shara, as he likes to term himself now, issued a new map recently of Syria, and it omitted the Golan Heights as part of their territory. So that gives you an indication of just how pliant this new government is to the interests of the U.S. and Israel. In addition, the Joulani's government condemned Iran for its completely justified, under international law, retaliation against the U.S. strikes on its nuclear facilities. Joulani condemned the strikes on Qatar, on the U.S. bases in Qatar. So this gives you an idea of where Joulani sits in the panoply of vassal states in the region. You asked, what do the Syrian people think? Well, I was in Syria in 2016 covering the 2016 parliamentary elections. I met the Druze leaders in the south, and I know that these are very, very strong leaders who despise the state of Israel. At that time, they were very strong supporters of the government of Bashar al-Assad because the government of Bashar al-Assad was the protector of minorities in Syria, the Druze, the Kurds, the Christians, the Alawites, the Shia, and so on. And so I also visited and I spoke to the Christian patriarch, and he led a delegation through the old city on the day of the election to get people to come and vote for the Syrian government of Bashar al-Assad for exactly the same reason. The new government of Joulani, the head chopper in Damascus, is responsible for, or is at least enabling, massacres of Christians and of Alawites in Syria. So My feeling is that the people of Syria are not happy at all
Right.
with the government that's been imposed on them by an invasion
Right.
from Turkey with support from the state of Israel,
Right.
and that it's. I think that probably Mr. Joulani is standing on very shifting sands, as your other guest suggests, with people sniping at him from the wings, but he's not popular. He's
Right.
among the Syrian people, and eventually, the Syrian people will come together, and they will create a new government in Damascus, as they have hundreds of times in the past, which
Right.
reflects their national interest and territorial integrity.
Okay.
That's what's going to happen eventually, despite all the
Okay, stay with me, Ken.
machinations
I'm sorry
of the
because we are
U.S.
running out of time. I just have one more question
Sorry.
for Ali. Ali, it's important that we talk about Iran in this context because it's not possible to talk about the situation going on in the West Asian region without mentioning Iran, especially in light of the 12-day aggression that was launched against the Islamic Republic. Do you see this new alignment as trying to isolate Iran, or do you see that this might actually lead to a more stronger Iran might emerge stronger in this contest? Give us your point of view as short as you can, please.
I think there's no little doubt that normalization between Syria and Israel can be framed as an attempt to further isolate or to strengthen the alliance against Iran. There's no doubt about that. And I think that both share a sheer animosity towards Iran. Remember, as your guest mentioned, Joulani, he used to be ISIS.
Right.
ISIS is known for its sheer hatred towards Iran. And the Zionist ideology is known for its sheer hatred towards Iran. So there's an important ideological dimension which is involved here. And I think that both will try and incorporate their efforts. And I think that Joulani, even more than some Persian Gulf Arab countries like Saudi Arabia, the UAE, I think he has this special hatred. As I said, he shares this enthusiasm with the Israeli side regarding Iran. So this will pose a challenge for Iran, I think, but I think that Iran as well has demonstrated how it can deal
Right.
with these threats, and that there are also certain cards which Iran can play to confront these possibilities.
Okay, that's all the time we have. Unfortunately, gentlemen, will have enjoyed keeping the conversation going. Thank you so much for your time, Mr. Ken Stone, and also Ali Risk joining us from Beirut. And viewers, that is all the time we have for this spotlight. Thank you so much for joining us. You can check on our website for more details and breaking news. Goodbye for now.